Audio Jungle.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Monica Franco. Monica is the VP of Contract Logistics Sales at DP World, a global logistics company. Monica has tons of experience in the world of supply chain and logistics. Monica, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. I'd like to start. I think the world of logistics and supply chain can be very complicated, right? There's obviously a lot of nuance to it. But from a basic understanding, if you could, explain to us what it is you do as if you were speaking to a 6-year-old.
Um, in a few words, I sell warehouses, warehouse services.
I think that's a perfect way of explaining it, very simply. So I think we'll start by kind of going through your career. If you could kind of enlighten me on how your career started, how did you choose this industry, and what were those first steps in you deciding this was what you wanted to do?
Well, actually, I didn't choose the industry chose me. Out of college, a girlfriend of mine called me and asked me for help to come over and help her in a warehouse operation that she was running. And I did not expect that 20 something years later, I'd still be in the industry.
I think from the people I've met within this industry, I think that is a lot of the answer, right? A lot of people kind of fall into the world of supply chain, and it's only now that we're seeing students kind of, we're seeing it as a degree option, supply chain, logistics. We're seeing it as kids wanting to join those bigger companies. Um, I think, you've obviously stayed in the industry, so ignoring how you got into it, but moving into why you've stayed in it for so long, what are the things about this industry that keep you in it, that keep you excited, that keep you enjoying your job?
Well, the business is very dynamic. You can sell one warehouse, you can sell two warehouses, but the reality is, or in logistics services in general, but there will always be a particular nuance of the business because customers are different. In general, they require the same similar types of services. However, there's particularities around what the customer really needs. So what makes it interesting is having that engagement with the customer and understanding what their needs are so that you can translate it back and sell services to them. So, working with different industries, from automotive to electronics to pharmaceuticals or medical devices, those are interesting industries in themselves. And what I do is basically cater to a lot of all those different customer bases.
Yeah, that sounds extremely simple, I'm sure that's a real walk in the park.
Yeah.
Um, moving away from the parts that excite you the most in this industry and moving more into the challenges you come across, what were some big pivotal challenges, either personally or, as a company or whether it be a contract, what were some big challenges, hurdles that you've kind of had to cross throughout your career that you've learned from the most?
Um, so at the beginning of my career, it was challenging because I was having children at the time, so I had very small babies. And going into this business is it consumes a lot of time and effort. So balancing work and the children was a challenge at the beginning. As you get into this industry and it continues to evolve, your career continues to evolve. I think you just need to have a particular personality for this business. It's always changing. You work with larger size organizations, usually global organizations. So the dynamics is what keeps you going, right? It is not an easy environment. However, and some say it's not even too easy for women because it is of that type of scale and dynamic. And if you look at the origins, is really more male dominated. Yeah. But I think the evolution of the industry has changed. So as you continue to grow and develop in the particular spaces that you're in, you start seeing a lot more openness and dynamics for women and for minorities. So that makes it interesting. However, it does come with challenges. And if you're up for it, it's a great industry to be in.
Yeah, without a doubt. Um, I think I'd like to touch on kind of how do people succeed within this industry, right? You touched on the kind of the vastness of it and the different type of people that come into it, right? I think obviously it's changed over time as has every industry, but specifically supply chain. What are the keys to success? You know, obviously this is easier asked than answered, but what leads to success from an individual standpoint within the world of supply chain?
I think having a mindset of learning, having to enjoy learning, being a networker, that is absolutely critical. This business is not done by one person; it's a collective. Being able to work with people, understand people, which is a challenge in itself in whatever space, but really being resilient. And sometimes what we do, and the providers in this space that do well are the ones that are able to provide solutions to customers. And solutions are not sometimes are not very easy to develop, right? There's a lot of negotiation, there's a lot of dynamics of trying to understand what the customer needs. And customers are customers, they're always right, right? So I think having all of that together with your ability to, if you have a sense of learning and development, and a little bit being thick-skinned in a lot of cases, I think you do well in this business. But this is not a typical 9 to 5 job. This goes usually outside of that standard realm. So if you're down for um, proactive activity, and looking ahead and being prepared constantly, and thinking ahead of what the customer is going to ask you, then this is something that is for you. I was asked once, and I had a college, my university where I went to, I was asked to come to a panel, and there was a question from one of the people in the audience, and I believe they're graduating that year from college, from that university. And they asked me, so what hours do you work? And I said, well, wow, if you ask me that question, this is not an industry for you.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on kind of that point you made, you know, the struggles kind of being a mother, right? Balancing family life and your own personal life. And like that, I think, you know, the world has moved more towards, okay, how do we create a healthy balance in, you know, in job markets? Now, some people are getting that, some people are not, obviously. But you personally, how do you balance, you know, your stress, your health, your outside life? I think a lot of kids, as they move into industries, think, you know, just about the job, but obviously you have a life outside of that. So how have you managed to, or if you have managed to balance your life inside and outside of work?
Um, well, I've been in the industry almost 27, 8 years. Um, so I gotta say, at the beginning, it's a lot of work. You really have to duke it out. And then you get to a point that you feel comfortable in the industry, and then you get to the point of saying, okay, you have a good network of people, and you've seen things, and experiences, and I in this industry I've seen a lot of people that had severe health issues, right? And if you just focus on the job, you're missing out. You're missing out on your health. You're missing out with your family. Those things need to be balanced. Easier said than done, of course. There's never a exact path of how to do that. However, you need to force yourself to be able to balance. If you don't, then yeah, it catches up with you. It really does, and it's never worth it, right? Because I mean, you can kill yourself in doing what you're doing. However, at the end of the day, you're one person out of a humongous organization, right? And no one's going to take care of you health wise, right? Obviously, you have insurance and all that good stuff, but the reality is, who suffer the most are the people around you, right? Your family. So you need to really balance that out. But at the beginning, that's almost impossible to do, right? You really need to learn the business and get engaged and be in it, otherwise you're out. But then you have to really start stepping back and saying, okay, how do I manage this better? And it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah. You touched on there how, it impacts your family, right? The more you kind of, if you're burning a candle at two ends, it impacts the people around you. I'd like to switch that and kind of ask, how have your family, your friends, people around you supported you within your career? How has your environment kind of helped you lead to success over the years?
So, my parents are from Colombia, so they did not understand this industry at all. Um, my dad was a mechanic. My mother was worked at a bank, so they did not understand what I was doing. However, the only way I was able to succeed in my career was because my mother helped me with my children. That was the balancing act that I did. If it wasn't for her, I don't think I would have really been able to do what I have been doing or traveled like I have been traveling because it's a tremendous amount of travel. If it wasn't for her, I mean, my husband at the time, he did his job and I was doing mine, but if it wasn't for her, impossible to do. Impossible. There's no way. So if it wasn't for her, really, it would have been a game changer for me, and I would have probably had to exit the industry. And then, you look at from the business perspective, you establish a network. You establish the go-to people, people that coach you, that guide you, have much more experience than you, and you leverage that, right? That helps tremendously. It kind of helps take you out of the box of what you're doing and the grind that you're doing. And that opens up the door to different perspectives that you probably didn't consider. And so that makes it a little bit easier. And it's always important to ask for help and guidance and support in whatever you're doing. And in this industry, you have to get that infrastructure within the industry. Otherwise, you just burn yourself out.
I think a theme I've been seeing throughout these interviews has been just the support of people and how much, it doesn't matter what industry it is, it's always the people business. And like that, whether it is our families that are our support network or our co-workers that do eventually become, some sort of family
Mhm.
within our business. And I think it's great to hear and see how much, people's success not only comes from their own, obviously you've had success because of yourself, but to see that it does come from others as well. If I could pivot you from there and kind of touch on kind of the current state of logistics supply chain. Obviously, I think like we touched on, it's heard about a lot more nowadays. I think it used to be something that people kind of thought about in the background, how something gets from A to B. Now it's obviously much more in the forefront for better or worse reasons.
Mhm.
What are the pivotal changes that are affecting your industry right now?
Trade, foreign trade, labor markets, um, natural disasters. Yeah. Um, Nuances with certain industries that, the automotive industry, for example, you have the EV environment that still hasn't picked up speed. We know we're going there anyway, right? Eventually, but it seems slower than it should. Technology, it changes every second, right? All that caters to the ability for providers, logistics providers to provide, that type of service. So all those type of things in um, that really change and drive the dynamics of the environments that we live in is really what we support, right, in this industry. After COVID, obviously, that made a big difference. Right now, logistics and supply chain is a big deal, and everybody understands what it is. But it still ends up being a commodity service, right? Because you're competing against other providers that do exactly the same thing. So, what boils into it is really the dynamics that you have with your customers, the relationships that you have. Yeah. That's what really makes the difference at the end of the day, and what drives the success factor for you is really that dynamic. How do you become head of the game instead of being reactive to what's happening around the customer base, what's happening to the world, and what's happening to us in general.
Yeah. Again, if I could kind of pivot you towards, I don't know how much of your day to day is hiring or, looking at this, these graduating students. But, I'm sure you have enough experience to put yourself in those shoes and kind of look, if you were to, be hiring kind of those 22-year-olds or maybe graduate students, what are the traits and experiences you would be looking for in a new hire that would be coming into this industry? Obviously, you touched on kind of the traits that lead to success throughout the industry, but if you could kind of look at somebody coming out of college, who would be someone you're looking to hire?
Um, well, I was there, right? So coming out of college, you know what you learned in college. However, the practice is really, the experience is really what makes a difference here. However, there are spaces and roles for people coming out of college. But what really makes the difference and ultimately what is the success of that person is their personality, their drive, their ability to listen and learn, their ability to communicate, their ability to establish networks, be social, right? And not work in their little silo. That doesn't work in this particular industry. Um, Not even from an operational level or a commercial perspective, right? You need to be able to engage and open to learning because every day you learn. I mean, I've been in the industry a long time and I learned every day, right? It's the different dynamics of needs of the customer. So I think that type of profile of a person is really what makes a difference. So for example, I'm in a convention this week and there's a lady setting up a booth for coffee for the convention. And so we would ask around, can you tell us where this hall is for this forum? And it was very difficult. The convention's huge. So it was very difficult to navigate there. But we got to this coffee station and the lady was super proactive. She's like, oh, here's the decaf, here's the regular coffee, and do you need anything else? And I mean, I turned over to my colleague and I said, we need to hire her because her dynamics of being facilitating, not just standing there and just watching us take the coffee. It was more engaging. She wanted to give us an experience that ultimately she didn't really have to do, but she went beyond her expectations of just standing there and making sure the coffee pot was full, right? That actually makes a difference in the industry. And that's the type of things that I would look for when I do recruiting. Um, can't be a person that just waits for stuff. No, you need to be a person that is proactive.
Yeah. From there, and you touched on it, I think perfectly. But who are the students? If they look in the mirror, who are the students who should go? Actually, I think supply chain is for me. I think logistics is for me. Who are the students who should be telling themselves, actually, this is the industry I should be moving into?
Um, it's a good question. Um, I think with that type of profile personality, and ultimately, I mean, this industry caters to a lot of things. Caters to finance, caters to management, caters to operational technical services. So it all depends what type of dynamic environments you're planning on doing or you have an interest to. What I would say is trying to get a network which would cater to taking a look at the business because as when I joined, I had no idea what I was going to do. My girlfriend calls me and she's like, I need your help. And I'm like, to do what? I wasn't sure what that meant. Eventually it got interesting and I started realizing what she needed me to do. But I think taking a look at the industry is really also very important. Um, so that that lines up, it has to be a fit, right? The organization you're working for with the person that, the dynamics of what they want to do with their career and how much investment of time and effort they want to learn in the environment. So I wouldn't say this is for everybody, but people that want to be a little bit more open-minded. And I always say that logistics is like doing time. Once you're done with it, you can pretty much do anything. Yeah, it really gives you an ability to kind of drive solutions. And even though you don't understand what you need to do, you kind of, if you try to figure it out, it gives you those skills to figuring things out. And that caters to any industry, really. beyond logistics. If you go into different environments, it actually helps in building that rapport and that ability for you to really be successful. So I mean, ultimately, if you're up for learning and driving your network and opening your mind to working with people, and which is a task in itself, I think this is a business for you. If you're not that type of person, yeah, it might be a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's an honest question people have to ask themselves before moving into any career, right?
Yeah.
They have to take that honest perspective and that reflection on themselves. And
Mhm.
is this something I'm going to be able to find success in? Monica, as we close this interview, I'd like to ask you one final question. If you could go back and give your 20-year-old college years kind of self some one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice be?
Find people that get exposed to industries and businesses. Find people that can help support that exposure and that understanding of what the industries are. I think in the college forums, I think ultimately that's what's missing. I do see it a lot more that you go to universities and you check them out and you see different, you can get industries come to certain universities and they, expose students to that. I think trying to get into those environments are phenomenal. I also think that people, if you connect the dots properly, organizations are actually willing to open the doors and share with you certain things, right? Not everything, obviously, but I think we're a lot more open to, especially global organizations, to open up to students and have conversations and come in for a couple hours and check out what you're doing, check out what we're doing, right? So that you get that exposure and that understanding, which I think hands-on is I think the best thing. You can read it from a book or a video or something, but the touch points is really what makes a difference, and people are not used to doing that, don't realize that you can do that, right? Or companies that are willing to support that. So if you reach out to, say, for example, HR in certain organizations, you have an interest in an organization and you reach out to HR, hey, I have an interest to understand your industry a little bit more. Would there be anybody in your organization that could help me understand the industry more? I'm more than positive you're going to get a lot more hits than not.
Monica, some great advice. I really appreciate your time and thank you so much for being with me.
Well, thank you so much for the invite. It was a great chat.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody.